Speakers. First of all, please welcome Associate Professor Colin Jones, Senior Academic Developer in the Office for the Advancement of Learning and Teaching at the University of Southern Queensland, USQ. Prior to joining USQ, Colin was a Senior Lecturer of Entrepreneurship at Queensland University of Technology from 2016 to 2020, and the University of Tasmania from 2001 to 2015, holding visiting professor positions at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David in Wales, Northeast Normal University in China, and Jilin Sport University in China. Colin currently acts as an external assessor to Griffith University for the Higher Education Act program and has been a regular contributor to policy discussions at the United Nations. In 2005, Colin was recognized for teaching excellence at the Carrick Australian Awards for University Teaching and was recognized as a Principal Fellow of Higher Education Act Advanced Higher Education in 2019 and has been recognized on numerous occasions for teaching excellence my bad. His podcast show, The Reasonable Adventurer, has been downloaded more than 74,000 times. Hello, Professor Jones, can you hear us? Hello?
Professor Jones, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so we just introduce you, so you may start your presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, no problems. Do you want me to share my slide?
Okay, please.
Just wondering here.
Okay, so I can allow you to share the screen. Okay, so can you share the screen now?
You want me to share mine? So is that okay?
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you.
My slides are up on the screen now.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, it's not up here. Oh, it's here.
Yep.
Okay, now that's much better.
So all good to go?
Yeah, good to go.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Well, look, it's a pleasure to be with you today. I hope you're all well. I'm in Brisbane, which is on the east coast of Australia, and it's heading towards dinner time here in the evening. And what I was hoping to do today was just to walk you through a few ideas from a lot of very interesting scholars who have long gone now, but the wonderful thing about scholarship is they've left their words, they've left their ideas, and they're there for us all to go and visit. And so perhaps I'll be introducing you to some people today, and my aim is to, suppose, challenge you in terms of how you think about where and what do you learn. From where is your learning happening? Do you need to enroll in a course to become enlightened? Could you walk down the street to become enlightened? Who would you see as a source of enlightenment? Would it be a professor? Could it be the person cleaning the street? So I want to challenge you a little bit to think about all the opportunities for listening to people and to questioning yourself as we go through. So I've got a title here today, which is Going One Step Beyond the Known. So there are a lot of things we can know. And one of the things that we rarely know is ourselves. And so my focus today very much is not about something you could learn about, but really focused on you. What is it that you could learn about yourself, and why? Why might you want to learn about yourself? So let's start the process and let's introduce our first thinker. Our first thinker was William Sumner, philosopher. And in 1902, he wrote a book I think it was called Earth. I've forgotten the title of the book, so apologies. But in that book, he had a very, very interesting chapter where he talked about purpose. And so I'll read you the quote. He said, "The observation that motives and purposes have nothing to do with consequences is a criterion for the distinguishing between the science of society and the views, whims, ideals, and fads which are current in regard to social matters." Now, this is a really fascinating idea to think about in today's age. What he's essentially saying is just because you think you can doesn't mean you can. Just because you have a purpose doesn't mean it'll produce a consequence. There are a raft of reasons. Quite often we have too much confidence in what we believe we can do. Perhaps we are naive about what we believe we can do. Perhaps there are a series of laws already working against us. So regardless of our intended efforts, maybe we're not going to be able to make things happen. So I think this is a really nice place to start, casting some doubt over what we can and can't do. And a big driver here is actually understanding ourselves. From where do our motives and our purposes come from? Do they come from a place where we actually can understand why we feel the way we feel, why we have confidence? So let's move on to our next inspiration. And this is one that really has a big part in my life. As an educator, for many years, I've introduced these 3 questions to my students because sometimes they'll want to know where all the theory is. And I'll say, well, we're not here to learn lots and lots of new theory. We're here to learn about you. And so John Ruskin, another philosopher, this time from England, in 1917, he wrote a book called The Stones of Venice. And in that book, he talked about a lot of things, but one of the things that he specifically talked about in a little appendix at the back of the book was education. And one of the observations he had was that really education could be reduced, the education of a person could be reduced to 3 questions. Does the student know where they are? Do they know where they're going? And do they know now what they would need to know in order, apologies for my typo there, in order to make that journey happen? Now, this is a fascinating way of reducing down our focus into what education is, because it tells us it really doesn't matter what all the subjects might bring us, because they may not be related to where we actually are, and they may not be related to where we're wanting to go. Our big challenge with all things in life in terms of finding enlightenment is understanding where we are. So who are we? Where are we at? Where do we want to go? And therefore, what do we need to know in order to make that journey happen? And his argument was that education systems should be built around that basic premise. Now, of course, education systems have been criticized for a long time. Most of the people that I'm sharing these ideas from today are people who have been very critical of traditional education systems set up around disciplines, around subject areas that relate to disciplines and professions and the like. And while we can't ignore the fact that someone who wants to become a surgeon needs to learn very specific set information, for many people, the life journey that they'll undertake is a little bit less structured and a little less known than that particular pathway. And so I'm challenging you in the spirit of enlightenment today to think about what might your journey look like and what might you need to know in order to make that journey happen. So let's move along to our next person. You may have heard of Carl Jung. He's a very famous psychologist. And he had a lot of ideas. I'm only going to pick up on just a little bit. And I've sort of cobbled together and sort of stitched together some of his thinking here. He noted that individuals develop not themselves, but a method and a collective mode of life at the cost of their own wholeness. But it is a stopgap, and not an ideal, for adherence to it involves renouncing one's wholeness. I'll come back and explain what I think he's referring to here in a second. Individual development means fidelity or loyalty to the laws of one's own being, or segregation of the individual from the undifferentiated and unconscious herd. Now, what he was arguing here was that if all we learn to do is learn to live with other people, learn what society rules are, what its norms are, what its expectations are, the more that we learn to live in this collective mode, the less opportunity there actually is for us to live as individuals, to understand who we are in a unique sense. And the second point that he's making here is that for us to truly become enacted into our full potential, we need to separate ourselves from this collective mode. We need to be able to find our own vocational calling. We need to be able to think about what it is that it means to be us as individuals. Because when we do that, we can return to the unconscious herd, groups, collective organizations, and we can make a more informed and more productive contribution, because we're now not all trying to make adjustments and to not upset other people. We now bring the uniqueness of ourselves to those social situations. So you can sort of see a theme starting here. If we want enlightenment, then it starts with ourselves. We're not going to get enlightenment from a book, right? That's just not going to happen. We're going to get it from stepping back and thinking about who we are. What do we want? Why do we want what we want? Where has that thinking come from? None of this is obvious. None of this is sitting on the surface. It's generally much deeper. So we can move on. From Jung, we go through to Veblen. Thorstein Veblen was an economist, a very, very interesting man, American. And in his book on the theory of the leisure class, he talks about this notion of a constant adjustment of the inner world to the outer world. And he says, social advance, your ability to move ahead in life. Social advance, especially as seen from the point of view of economic theory, consists in a continued progressive approach to an approximately exact adjustment of inner relations to outer relations. But here's the caveat. But this adjustment is never definitely established, since the outer relations are subject to constant change as a consequence of the progressive change going on in our inner relations. So as we, as individuals, are trying to adjust our thinking, our sense of self to the world that we're living in, we're doing that during a process when the collective nature of everyone else's inner thinkings is changing the nature of the outer world we live in. You can see that very clearly if you were to go back just 40 or 50 years. The world we lived in was very different. The markets that were in our streets were very dominated by very localized producers. And we weren't overly worried about what was happening everywhere else around the world. if we wanted to buy shoes, if we wanted to see the news, if we wanted to bank, if we wanted music, if we wanted to buy a book. But now all of a sudden, our collective genius has enabled a lot of people's inner drives, inner worlds, to bring about substantial technological change. And we now have a world that's organized through the internet. As a result, our inner self is constantly challenged at trying to make an adjustment to the outer world, which is so hard to define now. It's so tricky to actually work out what are we supposed to be adjusting to, right? Because from one industry to another, it changes so radically and is so different. It's not what's down the street. It's what's around us. And more often than not, that's quite invisible. So let me introduce you to Eduard Lindemann, maybe one of my favorite writers. So in 1926, he wrote a book called The Meaning of Adult Education, which is considered a classic and the first full treatment of adult education. In this book, he has a lovely little sentence there where he says, the approach to adult education, and I'm taking this to be anyone who's older than 17, the approach to adult education will be via the route of situations, not subjects. Our academic systems have grown in reverse order. Subjects and teachers constitute the starting point. Students are secondary. This is fascinating. You think this through. Now, he wasn't the first person to make these observations. You had Rousseau 300 years before this, right? 300 years talking about how we were substituting the opportunities for experiences in life as learning opportunities to things that are written in books that don't constitute a learning experience within the actual life of people. So this is not a brand new idea, but what Lindemann was sort of saying was learning and enlightenment, they don't finish when we've completed our degree. I've got a piece of paper on the wall that says I'm a graduate. That doesn't mean we stop finishing. Maybe I need to change the tire on my car on the way home. Maybe I want to cook a new recipe. Maybe I want to take up art. Maybe I want to play a musical instrument. So I'm going to be learning, and we all learn through life. A lot of our learning gets domesticated into school contexts as we're very young. But as we get older, we become fully responsible for the nature of our learning. And that learning typically won't occur through subjects. It will occur through situations, which means we need to become very mindful of who it is that is embracing a situation, being able to reflect on our experiences and our opportunities to repeat those situations in different ways, and how other people travel with that through those situations with us. These are all very interesting things to contemplate. So we can move from 1926 through to 1925, 35. And here, the great Kurt Lewin, psychologist and a really, really influential person, in his book on personality, he expressed behavioral change with this formula. Behavior is a function of the interplay between a person and their environment. This is very profound, because what he's arguing is, one, the person needs to know who they are in order to change the nature of their behavior. And more complicated, they need to understand the nature of their environment if they're able to make that adjustment. You can sort of see the connection here going back to Veblen, where we've got these inner relations, the inner world of the person, and the outer relations of their environment, and this constant toing and froing between the two, right? And as these shifts occur, we see changes in behavior. So if we want to make a behavioral change, it's going to be as a result of us adjusting ourselves to our environment, or us changing aspects of the environment to suit ourselves, or combinations of both. From 1935, we can move through to George Stapleton, someone that I suspect you most probably have never heard of. And you can see from this little bit ghosty picture here, a very hard man to get a picture of as well. He was an ecologist who did a lot of work in England in thinking about how should we manage land. So he's very interested in the nature of the environment. And like a lot of philosophers, and maybe I should just make this point, many of the people that I'm sharing with you here became seen as philosophers and engaged in the behaviors of philosophy. But none of them, I don't think, are trained as philosophers. So you can sort of see, when you think about natures of enlightenment here, you can become a philosopher in two ways. One, you go to university and you study philosophy and you graduate as a philosopher. And at the end of that process, you ask yourself a question: to what do I want to direct my philosophical capabilities? I'll go over there and I'll ask questions about this, or I might go over here and ask questions. Alternatively, and which is by far the most influential when we go back 100 years, you're just somebody who actually has a pretty good handle on a particular context, and you ask very interesting questions about that context, and you become seen as a philosopher. So either you train as a philosopher and you decide where you will direct your training, or as an expert in an area, you ask particular questions about that. And quite often, in this, in the spirit of enlightenment, it is not the answers that we seek. It is just purely exploring the questions that enables us to gain enlightenment, because those questions are bringing us closer to the unknowns. And as we get closer to the unknowns, we realize that we're going to have to ask some more questions and some more questions. And before you know it, we're traveling forward. We are learning about ourselves and the world we live in, rather than finding nice, neat answers to complicated questions. Anyway, George, he stated that man's adaptability enables him to fulfill an unlimited number of purposes. In this way, he is free to progress. But his very adaptability has allowed him to create an environment that threatens to swallow him up. How can he know whether he is progressing or destroying himself? For the last 70 or 80 years, our ability to adapt and create has been amazing. We've created so many nuclear weapons. We've created so much pollution. We've created so much unsustainability. Is that progress? Or are we in the act of destroying ourselves? So that we discover something about ourselves and we understand our ability to influence aspects of our environment, that doesn't necessarily guarantee some form of progress. That actually could ultimately become the destroying of ourselves, our communities, and so on and so on, right? So we need to understand the nature of who we are and what we're attempting to do. Remember, right back at the beginning with Sumner, purpose doesn't equal consequences. Lots of people have had good motives and good purposes, and then they've ended up with unintended consequences. So from 1942, well, let's just stop there for a moment. Why would I be showing you all of this? Why does it matter? Well, these charts here are looking at levels of anxiety and stress in the general population. And you can see from 2000 through to 2016, you've had anywhere from 2 to threefold increase in society of anxiety. Think about yourself, think about your friends. Do they find the world an easy place to live in? Is it just relaxing? Is it easy? Is it obvious what you're doing? One of the challenges, of course, of finding some form of enlightenment is finding peace with who you are and what you're attempting to do. What is your purpose? What would you settle for? Can you eliminate the opportunities in your life to compare yourself to other people? Can you just be happy with what you have? These are all big challenges. And anxiety, from my perspective as an educator, is something that is off the leash and running wild. And education faculties and departments are forever having to make allowances and accommodations to support students who are finding it very difficult to complete their studies, especially when we have things like COVID coming along, which have made the whole process of study and being tied to one institution, especially if you're studying overseas and other such things, really, really difficult, right? So we've got this opportunity to think about who we are. We've got this opportunity to think about our inner world and our outer world and the adjustments that we can make. And are we making those adjustments in ways that can actually lead to good outcomes in order for us to progress? So where do we go to next? Well, I want to introduce you to Rollo May. Now, Rollo May is a fascinating person. And if you haven't looked at Rollo May's work, go and check it out. The easiest way to find any of these characters that I've spoken to you is just go to archive.org, and open up a free account. It's just like an international library. And all of these people's old books are all there, right? So easy to find their works. And then you can just read them. It's so easy. Rollo May was a big writer on anxiety. And he noted anxiety, like a torpedo, strikes underneath at the deepest level or core of ourselves. Thus, anxiety, in greater or less degree, tends to destroy our consciousness of ourselves. But the positive and hopeful side is that just as anxiety destroys our self-awareness, so awareness of ourselves can destroy anxiety. This is big, because when we focus our education on subjects and not on situations and ourselves within those situations, we remove the possibility of increasing our self-awareness of ourselves. So we can accept that anxiety exists right across society, and indeed is a good thing in society. That's what Rollo May would say. It is a thing to celebrate if it's this big. If it's this big, not such a good thing. But you want anxiety. If you had no anxiety, you would just walk down the street without a worry in the world. You wouldn't be concerned. You wouldn't have any sense of worry about doing anything. So anxiety stops us from putting ourselves in harm's way, right? It's a beneficial thing when it's just here to keep ourselves in check. When it rises too high, of course, it becomes debilitating. It stops us from being able to do many things in life. What Rollo May is arguing is just as anxiety attacks our sense of self, understanding ourself will enable us to erode the potentialities of anxiety. So it's not by coddling and making everyone feel comfortable that we fix anxiety. It's by helping people learn about themselves. There's a path of enlightenment at a personal level which will actually help people to find a way forward. And I think the work that you can tap into, which will really help you on that journey, is from this guy here, Robert Keegan, recently retired professor from Harvard. Now, he has this lovely, his work is not exactly easy to work its way through, but putting that to one side, he notes in his 1994 book, Over Our Heads, individuals have limits. There are depths beyond which they cannot go. Take them there and they will be in over their heads. So his argument is that for most people, we can either have, there are 5 minds, but these are his last 3, right? So there's an instrumental mind, which would be on the bottom side of this. That's just someone who goes to work and doesn't think about anything. They just do what they're told, right? So we'll assume you're not going to be in that world. And then we have the socialized mind. This person's good, team player, faithful, good at aligning things and doing things. But that's not enough to create progress in your life. That's not really enough to get ahead. That keeps you in a relatively safe job. There's a problem. There's not so many relatively safe jobs anymore, is there? So we're looking for people to be relatively agile, able to move between careers, right? Self-authoring mind. But how do we get there? How do we get to become into this next level of awareness? Well, we start thinking about, who are we talking to? How do they perceive us? What are they thinking about? And then the self-transforming mind, his argument is that that's not going to be happening for most people until they get to around age 40, maybe a little bit earlier for women, but for most men around 40. So that's definitely the mind we would love to aspire to, but you're not going to get it when you're 20, because there's a lot of life experience. There's a lot of finding moments of peace to step back and really ask yourself a lot of metacognitive questions and to view everything, every situation from multiple perspectives. The point he's making is that we typically operate in the world in a way that doesn't require us to have high levels of self-awareness. But if we want to progress through life, if we want to make these adjustments between our inner and outer worlds, that will require us to develop high levels of self-awareness. If we do that, we create an opportunity that when we get into our middle years, there is this possibility of an even higher level of outcome for individuals, that being what he refers to as this self-transforming mind. So the last slide that I'll leave you with is this challenge. And he notes, it remains for us to look at the curriculum of modern life in relation to the capacities of the adult brain. Oh, you might be thinking, where can I find this curriculum of modern life? It's in your shoes. It's out the window. It's where you walk every day. It's the things that you aspire to do. The curriculum of modern life is your life. It's all of the situations you're currently in and the ones you would like to experience. That is the curriculum that you need. And the teacher there, the teacher who assesses you, is your environment. You might find someone like me who's an educator, and I might be able to act as a facilitator on that journey. But the assessor, the person who actually says you're doing well, we've got some concerns, that's the environment. That's the world you live in. The curriculum of modern life is the world you experience. And that ultimately is where your enlightenment lies, not in a book and not from coming and studying a subject. They are useful things, of course, for making sure that the career choices that you're making can fall into a line with expectations in society and you can find a starting point and away you go. But ultimately, to progress in those spaces and to take advantage of the opportunities present in your life, you need to be a little bit enlightened. And to do that, you need to create your own opportunities for learning from the life that you're living. So I'll stop sharing my slides here. And if we've got some questions, I would be more than happy to answer those.
Do you have any questions online, Pham? No, but personally, I have some questions. Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm actually the MC of this room, but
Yes.
I watched the whole presentation and I felt very, very fascinated by the idea that you bring up. So earlier in the Robert Keegan slide, it mentioned that to have a self-transforming mindset, you can be a meta leader, right? Is that right? So what
Yes.
does it mean to be a meta leader?
A meta leader is somebody who's able to take on and understand multiple perspectives within a particular context. So if I was using that transforming mind in the room you're in, if there's three of us there, I'm thinking about what's everyone thinking? How are they interpreting whatever the situation is? How might I adjust what I'm about to say so that I can be effective to both people who are in the room, keeping in mind what's happening outside in the broader world? So I'm not just talking about what matters to me. I'm not talking about what is the objective of an organization. I'm trying to understand how everyone else would engage with that challenge, that opportunity, that process, and trying to make sure that everybody has actually got an opportunity. And that's my challenge. My challenge is to step back. Who am I talking to? What are their needs? What are their concerns? What are their problems? But who do I represent? You know, and what might be the unintended consequences of moving forward in this space? So I'm taking on multiple conceptions of this space, and I'm trying to balance them out rather than, and I'm open to compromise, and I'm thinking about what might be possible and what might evolve through the conversations, and I'm seeing them as two-way processes and opportunities for questions. I'm looking at myself as a listener, and I'm thinking, right, well, I'm delivering something today. How am I going to create opportunities for me to listen to people so that I can actually respond to them in a way that will actually help them to understand, you know, what's at play, right? So it's a much more dynamic process than simply saying I need to draw up a plan and I need to communicate the plan and resource the plan and make sure that we can have the plan put in place, right? It's sort of saying, well, I've got a sense of where we want to go, but I want to make sure I'm going there with people and understanding the nature of their journey, and then making sure that we can all go in that journey together as best we can.
We would care more about the emotion of the people around us. And
yes.
yeah, oh yes. So I have one more question about the earlier slide. I don't remember it was the maybe George Stopdon, was it?
Yes.
So he talks about man's adaptability allows him to grow, to progress, but at the same time, it makes the environment more threatening and more dangerous and could swallow himself, right? So my question is, how do we know that we are progressing? Or moreover, how do we know that we are progressing in the correct way? Because me personally, okay. So me personally, I have a career path, but recently I have found that my career path is rather very far away, and sometimes I feel very lost. Like, I don't know if I am going in the right way. And during the process, sometimes I wonder, am I wasting my time? Why I am going this way, the wrong way? The others are progressing, and how would I catch up with them? Would I need to go back the whole way, or could I just make a turn and go on the right path? Like, yeah, so the whole idea is, how do we know that we are progressing in the right way?
Yeah, so look, that's never an easy question, but ultimately it's one that you can ask by sitting down and asking yourself, what do you think your true calling is? What makes you happy? Not what would make you happy. You could say, well, having $1 million would make me happy. Forget that. What makes you happy? Right? So what is your calling? Is the path that you're walking something that's in your heart? Or is it more something that you feel a motivation to because you think, well, people who follow that path end up successful. They have a nice car, they have a nice house. That doesn't necessarily mean that the people who have a nice car and a nice house are happy, right? So what is your calling? There's another guy, and I haven't used him here today, but I'll put him in this little speech here. If I can get him to come up. This guy here, Eric Hoffer. So Eric Hoffer, his work is just unbelievable. It is just mind-blowing. So Eric Hoffer worked on the docks, on the wharf. He worked on the wharfs for nearly all his life. He was blind from age 5 to 15. He's an incredible person, right? And one of the things that he's just a philosopher of life, just very, very interesting. One of the things he argues is that nature lost. Nature lost when it didn't allow humans to be complete. So a spider is complete. It evolves very little, right? An ant is complete. A bird is complete. They're not looking for any major improvements to their environment, to their world, right? Because nature completed them, right? And the evolution that happens in those species happens over hundreds and thousands of years, right? But we have this creativity, we have this desire for progress, for change. And as a result of not being complete, we find ourselves forever wanting to change the environment. And we do it in such a way that most probably is going to be at the expense of the environment itself. So this is an idea that Hoffer has. I'll read you one little last passage because it sort of speaks to that. And I think it's a nice place for us to sort of finish in terms of challenging our thinking. So this is what Hoffer says, the very first thing he says in this book, Reflections on the Human Condition. He says, nature attains perfection, but man never does. There is a perfect ant, a perfect bee, but man is perpetually unfinished. He is both an unfinished animal and unfinished man. It is this incurable unfinishedness which sets him apart from other living things. For in an attempt to finish himself, man becomes a creator. Moreover, the incurable unfinishedness keeps man perpetually immature, perpetually capable of learning and growing. And it's this capacity for learning and growing that has led us to not always creating good things, right? And so how will we know? Well, always come back and ask what's in your heart. What is it that you would be happy knowing? What would be happy for the loved people around you? What would they want you to be doing? And how does that reconcile with what they're doing, right? And yeah, you may have to make some adjustments at points in your life. Sometimes those adjustments come not through choice, but through lack of choice, right? Because we make mistakes in life and things get corrected and on it goes, right? So we all have to become philosophers of our own life so that we can pick ourselves back up and move on and sometimes go in a different direction, right? But that's, in a sense, very much about this notion of enlightenment. It's not that there's some subject area that's waiting for us to discover. It's just us discovering ourselves and being comfortable with who we are and being able to settle for what it actually is we'll do while we're here on the earth. And then beyond that, maybe we've been clever enough to write a book, and in 100 years' time, people will be looking back at a few words we've written. This is what he wrote. Hoffa, in another one of his books called The Passionate State of Mind, in the book, this is what he said he wanted to be known for. He said, "If anyone asks me what I have accomplished, I will say all I have accomplished is that I have written a few good sentences." I think I'd be happy to be remembered as that. Someone who might have written a few good sentences. I think that's not a bad aim to have.
Okay, thank you.